Logan, I think it's more like 6 or 7 seconds that you need before I get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the Transportation and Public Safety Budget meeting to order. I want to thank everybody that's going to present today. You know, we've been doing an extensive deep dive on salary issues at the state, and so thank you for getting everything together in a hurry as we threw this together. Before we get started, first thing on the agenda is a request for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions today? Seeing none, we're going to depart just a little bit from the agenda. Merle's got a document that he wants to discuss. As you guys know, we're really going to have to start cruising through budgets next week. There's been a slight change to the schedule. I don't know if we've got it to you guys all yet, but my first report out is going to be Thursday rather than Friday. So we're going to have to really work fast on the fire marshal budget. That's a biggie. Anyway, get started, Merle, with what you want to tell us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would refer everybody to a document that says Budget Committee and Subcommittee Report Out Procedures. These are very similar to procedures that we used last year. In previous years, this committee would hear a budget, they would consider recommendations, and then we would record those recommendations in a subcommittee report that the chair then shares in the full House appropriations. In previous years, we went around to every individual and had them add signatures. Last year, because of the pandemic, we wanted to avoid going around to every member, so we adopted an implementation, a process of emailing this out to members, and members would let us know if they dissented from the report. That is essentially the same process that we will use this year. If you'll see on item 1, all budget and subcommittee members will be emailed a copy of the budget report by noon the day before the budget is scheduled to be reported out by the chair in the full House appropriations. So you'll get that no later than noon the day before. Hopefully, in a perfect world, we can get that to you pretty shortly after you've done recommendations. Any replies will be due to that fiscal analyst by 5 p.m. the day before the budget's scheduled to be reported out. So you'll see that's a pretty small window. It's at least noon to 5. In the event a member of the Budget Committee or Subcommittee does not believe the report is ready to be presented, they can notify us, and that can be recorded in the minutes for House appropriations. This process is not meant to replace the minority report. Minority reports are still permitted. Essentially, it's emailing members, and you let us know if you dissent from that report. Please note that the subcommittee report, what we ask you to look at is to make sure that the information accurately reflects what was voted on by the group. It is not, we are not asking, it's not whether you concur with the actions that are taken, but it's whether you think the language that we've recorded reflects accurate. Does that make sense? The vote, the decision has already happened in the chamber here, so we're just wanting to make sure everybody agrees that the language in the report is correct. And I can stand for questions, or we can move on. Questions
for Merle? Go ahead, Representative Resman.
Sure. So you'll want to know either way whether we agree or not agree with the report?
No response is agreement. Okay. If you dissent, that is when we would need you to let us know. Otherwise, we will assume members are comfortable with the language in the report.
That's right. And remember, it's not whether you agree with the vote of the committee, it's whether you think the report accurately reflects the action that the committee took. So, anything else? Okay. And I just saw that it was on the agenda also. Thank you, Susan. But everybody has a new sheet that shows what we're going to get. So we're really going to have to work hard on making sure that we get our thoughts together on a Wednesday for the budget recommendations on the state fire marshal. That's a pretty big budget. Some of these others probably, it'll be pretty evident what action we want to take. So. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll start off with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. We have Director Thompson here. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Francis, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the KBI and some of the challenges we're facing with regard to recruitment and retention of personnel. As a public safety agency, we rely greatly on our ability to retain and recruit highly educated, well-trained, and appropriately experienced personnel of impeccable moral and ethical character. So I'll apologize first for the length of our written testimony, but we tried to really drill down and provide a summary of the most significant points for your consideration. We've brought forward 3 separate enhancement requests to address retention and recruiting across our entire agency. And there's 3 main buckets there. The first is investigations, one of our major programs. The second is our forensic laboratory services, another one of our major programs. And then all of our professional staff that support the operations of the entire agency. And while we have resource shortfalls that are in many areas of our organization, we're not meeting our performance targets. And as a result, we've had to face the fact that in order to find a solution to that, we have got to address recruiting and retention problems. We can't ever address the rest of those resource shortfalls until we have sufficient personnel that we are able to hire and retain in the organization. So our focus for this year is those 3 different but yet intertwined requests for consideration of salary funding for those 3 buckets of individuals that I discussed with you. And I do want to say that we're continuing to work with the Division of Budget to refine our original proposal that you guys are probably looking at as far as our enhancement requests in our budget document. And our hope is to find a solution with Division of Budget that will be able to meet our critical needs, and they will also be something that the Division of Budget and you guys can work with and get behind as far as being able to address our concerns. And while we don't have that package necessarily finalized at this point, we hope to have that accomplished by next week, by the next time that we meet. Again, it's in process of working with Division of Budget also. But as a result, today we're just going to try to summarize our problem, provide a much more specific plan to you in the next couple of weeks. So my ask of you would be to give heightened consideration to our critical public safety role and the essential contributions that the KBI makes to the safety and security of our state. And please understand that these are the essential responsibilities that we're not able to really get at as a direct result of our staffing, available staffing. And this is enterprise-wide. It's not just in one particular spot or another. So our proposals are based upon research, but we hope to provide a basis for filling all of our positions that we currently have authorized to make us more competitive in our environment, to retain our very talented individuals that we currently have, and because we can't build more effective programs and responses until we have a more robust staffing system in place. That's the core issue that we've got to get at today. So I would say that we are really in interesting times right now. For the past 3 years, we've seen dramatic increases in violent crime after more than 2 decades of falling crime rates in our state. We're experiencing unprecedented numbers of drug and overdose deaths and sharply increasing numbers of our citizens who are negatively affected because of the illegal drug use is prevalent in our state. We unfortunately have those resource limitations that I'd mentioned before, and that's necessitated us setting some priorities and actually reducing services to some level. And we focus on 4 particular areas of business. We focus on violent crime, crimes against children, public integrity, and criminal organizations. We have a very limited white-collar crime capacity, but we have no capacity to address citizen concerns directly. Most of the cases that come to us come through our law enforcement partners to support them. So, we have the typical existing threats that are out there: violent crime, criminal enterprises, child crime, in-custody deaths, law enforcement use of force, and a lack of a major surge capability for major crime investigations. We also have a lot of new threats that are out there: cybercrime, human trafficking, transnational organized crime, school violence, hate crimes, domestic terrorism. The list just goes on, that we are concerned about and need to stay on top of. We also have some heightened expectations from our citizens, law enforcement partners, and the courts. So we have a very well-respected and highly collaborative law enforcement community in our state, and that's very good for all of us. And investments in public safety agencies like the KBI, whose business plan is based upon that collaboration to support our local partners, is a very good investment. I would like to hopefully make that point during my comments today. So let me get into the salary issues. As I'd mentioned, we have been experiencing difficulty with recruiting and retaining investigative forensic science and professional staff for a number of years. There are several factors that I try to summarize that have contributed to those difficulties, but the first is to recruit our special agents. We are not pulling from colleges, universities, that kind of thing necessarily. We are trying to hire seasoned investigative personnel with substantial amounts of investigative or law enforcement experience. So we are hiring our personnel from our local agency partners. But over the past 6 years, which included 7 separate classes, on average, less than 10% of the people who applied for our agency had the preferred qualifications that we are seeking to address the kinds of responsibilities that we have. So to find those applicants with experience equivalent to the type of investigations that we do, we often look to larger law enforcement agencies. Unfortunately, the larger law enforcement agencies are having the same issues, but they are able to pay significantly higher for their positions normally classified as detectives than what we are. And as a result, we oftentimes are required to draw our candidates from smaller departments that may not have that same level of experience for us. So our division of investigations has approximately 86% filled rate. I should do that opposite and say what the vacancy rate is.
So you got a 14% vacancy rate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And we have approximately 73 agents working in the field in the 105 Kansas counties. So second, our hiring processes and standards are probably somewhat more rigid than many of the other public and private agencies that we could be drawing from, due to the sensitive and confidential nature of the information that we handle and the things that we do. To give you a sense, over the last 3 years, we've made almost 300 conditional offers of employment, and of that actual numbers 279, we've rescinded 152 of those offers of employment. And that's after the basic kinds of screening that most organizations would do. So 54% of the applicants who then reach that level, the basic screening that we've offered a conditional offer to, did not pass the stringent requirements that we put in place for our organization. So the third thing I would mention is that we also are seeing the same difficulties within our forensic sciences classifications. And it's becoming more and more difficult for us to compete in an environment where scientific staff is in great demand, especially with some of the things that are going on with the pandemic, that kind of thing. So as we continue to face these staffing challenges as our salaries are not competitive, we have struggled, if you will. We've been reasonably successful in hiring applicants with little or no laboratory experience, and then we perform or provide a lot of training, and that training process is about at least 12 months, usually 24 months, and the training costs, depending on the discipline that the scientist is working in, are anywhere from $80,000 to $200,000. So there's a significant investment in time and money. And then finally, our attempts to recruit in the professional staff environment, we're finding a lot of competition in the private sector and within other government agencies. I try to use an analogy of a car when I speak with our staff to try to impress the importance of every single job that we have and how it contributes to our overall mission. And I would say the same thing applies here, that we need to look at our agency or enterprise as a whole and not just single out different groups, because the agency comes together, pulls together to accomplish our mission, and we need to consider salary shortcomings or salary shortfalls for all of our personnel, and that's what we're asking for your overall consideration here. That analogy basically is, though, that a car's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to do its job of transporting you from place to place if all of the parts aren't present and all of the parts aren't working effectively. And it's how I tend to look at our organization. We've all got to be successful, and we've all got to be working together to accomplish our goals or our mission. So for that reason, we're seeking these three separate enhancement packages, but they are, again, all related. You guys have been hearing a lot about recruiting and retention, I understand. And the challenges to law enforcement recruiting aren't just in Kansas. They're all over the country. There's a lot of barriers to getting good people to come to public safety agencies, and that includes those higher levels of qualifications, the extensive background investigations that people must subject themselves to. There's just a number of things like that. For us, the ideal special agent candidate has a college degree, 6 years of felony crime experience, and that's our hope, that's our goal to have. And unlike many of our traditional law enforcement partners, we don't have a patrol requirement or responsibility. So our personnel, I guess, are starting at a different level where we expect them to come on board with that certain level of experience. Most law enforcement agencies don't allow their personnel to become detectives for several years after joining the organization. So kind of in keeping with that, what's important to us is not only to bring someone on with a heightened level of experience, but the longer we can keep them, the more experience they gain and the better they do at the complex investigations that we ask them to undertake. Just in an era when it's increasingly harder to recruit candidates to the law enforcement profession, and the KBI in particular, it's even more critical that once we do have someone come on board, that we retain them. We believe that adjusting the existing recruitment and retention plan for our special agents would provide an increased incentive for our personnel to stay with us, and they would provide incentive for personnel who would consider coming to work for us to come aboard. So again, as I mentioned, we're working with the Division of Budget to try to refine our plan and get more specific at our next hearing. Let me just point out a few things. The starting salary for a newly hired KBI agent is $53,400. We looked at a series of a number of different agencies that were similarly situated, our partners in the surrounding states and some of the ones that are in the second tier of states. And if you're looking at the testimony, I'd kind of refer you to Figure 1 here and see that we are about fourth or fifth in that tier of starting pay for investigators of similar situated state agencies. And I think what's important here is that several years ago, when we'd open up positions for hire, we'd get 200 applicants. We would get a lot of applicants. We've had a current posting out there, current class open for about 2 weeks, and we've got 16 applicants. And that's a significant change. If you look at the numbers for disqualifiers, that kind of thing, that would mean very few of those individuals would even make it through the process. We also took a look at larger agencies in Kansas, the ones that would have personnel who had the level of experience that we would hope to find. And I'd ask you to kind of look at Figure number 2 in the testimony. And what should be our recruiting pool, we are at the lowest level of the organizations that we should be recruiting from because of their size and experience level. So only 4 of the 12 state agencies that we pulled start investigators at a lower salary than we do. Of those 4 agencies, one of those 4 agencies does surpass the KBI after 1 year. So even though the starting pay is a little bit lower, within the year they're above us. 7 of the 12 state agencies surpass the KBI at the top end of the salary by more than $10,000. Texas DPS, for an example, has a mandatory overtime provision, and their starting salary with that mandatory overtime provision is raised to over $100,000, almost $49,000 more than what our starting pay is. And although the starting pay for the OSBI or the Oklahoma Bureau is comparative to the KBI, after 1 year, the OSBI special agent moves to $61,800, which again surpasses what one of our agents would be making similarly situated. Just a kind of a point of reference, this is a kind of an earning difference of more than $125,000 over about a 13-year period of time. So again, we need to be recruiting from the state agencies. We need to be recruiting from the larger local law enforcement agencies, and our salaries just we don't have a competitive ability to do that. But when you look at the larger law enforcement agencies in the state, if we look at the Topeka Police Department, a detective there earns $60,000, or about $6,800 more than what a starting KBI agent does. At the end of the scale, the KBI agent would earn $13,500 less than what a Topeka Police Department detective would. Similar situation exists with Lawrence. They would make approximately $5,000 into scale more than what our personnel would. The large agency that's somewhat comparative is the Wichita Police Department, and they start similarly, and they, at end of scale, are somewhat similar. Johnson County, their positions, they equate as a sergeant. And so a sergeant with the sheriff's office there, or an investigator, would start at about $66,000, which is $12,000 more than what a KBI special agent would receive. And they would top out at $99,000, which is roughly $24,000 more than the end of scale for a KBI agent. And the one that really blows us out of the water is the KCK Police Department. They start at $88,141, which is $34,000 a year more than what our personnel are compensated. So a summary of those comparative salaries in local agencies and in different state agencies. We believe there's a compelling case to show that the KBI special agent is earning at least $10,000 less than their counterparts on an average at the end of their career path. Top end pay for KBI special agents is the 5th lowest out of the 12 state agencies that we surveyed. And if you would look at figures 3 and figures 4, you can kind of see the top end salary range and where the KBI places in those particular groups. Let me jump real quickly then to our forensic laboratory. Many of the same things apply here. However, the study that we conducted for salaries were from 7 forensic laboratories that are in this area, to include 2 in-state laboratories, the Johnson County Lab and the Sedgwick County Lab. And given time issues, I'd just call your attention to figure 5, which depicts the starting, midpoint, and top pay for a forensic scientist 1 among those agencies. A forensic scientist 1 is the scientist class from start of employment through the first 1 to 2 years when they receive the required work authorizations and certifications to do court work, if you will.
Excuse me, to do what?
To be able to testify as an expert in court.
And do they then become, after 1 or 2 years, become a forensic scientist too?
Yes.
So maybe I'm being naive, but then it would look like the starting pay for the forensic scientist 1 is an important point, but really once they get their certifications and they've proven their ability to progress in the profession, they go to a forensic scientist 2. So the midpoint pay and top pay would not be as critical in this position because there's a planned progression to scientist 2, which is pretty adequately paid, except compared to Iowa.
Yeah, and the FS1 position, or forensic scientist 1 position, is kind of front-loaded because you need to draw the person to the agency, if you will. And on average, though, if you look, the forensic scientist 1 for the KBI is paid about $19,000 less at the top end of that short scale for comparative work than the other laboratories after 2 years. So there's still a disparity at that front end. If you jump to the forensic scientist 2 level, that disparity closes a little bit, but our folks are still about $14,600 lower in the forensic scientist 2 range, which usually lasts about to year 5. And the forensic scientist, too, is when they're able to testify in court. They're kind of the journeyman position, if you will, in the laboratory. They can then move to the forensic scientist 3, which is the highest level of working scientist, if you will, in the laboratory. And at that point, the differential closes quite a bit, and that differential goes down to about $9,000 per year.
And what's the requirements to go from a 2 to a 3?
There are a number of them, but there's things like, do they publish research? Do they have a technical specialty where they review others' work? In a forensic laboratory, you generally have 2 different individuals, completely separate, doing the same type of, or doing the same analysis on an individual case, so that hopefully that if there are any errors, anything that happened, they would be able to spot those errors before the results are published. So an individual in that role who is checking the work, kind of redoing the work, if you will, of others to make sure it's accurate, is one of those higher levels in the laboratory for forensic scientist 3.
And at what level does a master's and a doctorate become required to go to either of those 2 levels?
Well, the higher your educational level allows you to move then into the forensic scientist 3. It does not require a doctorate to get there, but most everyone has a master's degree that's in that particular realm. But there's a number of those things that we find value in that would allow them to move into that range.
Is there a master's requirement to be a 2?
No.
Bachelor's only for 1 and 2?
Yes.
Can you be a 3 and be a bachelor's, technically?
I believe that you can if you have certain other criteria met, certain certifications throughout the laboratory system. Let me move then very quickly so we can keep everybody else on schedule. Is package number 3, which involves the rest, I guess it's kind of the rest of our organization, IT personnel, support personnel in all levels, whether it be in our fiscal office, in our HR office, all the organizational components that help us to get our job done. We believe it's extremely important for them to be brought along with the other positions within the agency. And because of the wide variety of people and responsibilities, felt the most equitable way of doing that was to look at a simple, straightforward percentage increase across the board for those individuals in those identified classes. Looking at some of our administrative assistants, things like that, we pay somewhere in the range of $12.66 at the lowest level. And just looking at some of the data that's out there for private enterprise, there's significantly higher salaries being paid for significantly less responsible work. So bottom line for that particular group, we were seeking a 10%, and that brings folks a lot closer, at least gets us over the line to probably the $15 per hour rate. Mr. Chairman, I have a number of other points, but I do recognize the time. Would you like to kind of refer to the testimony, or would you like me to continue?
I think we can probably read through it, but we'd love to probably have a chance to ask you some questions. You know, obviously we need to see dollar amounts and what you work out before we dive too much into this. Does anybody have any questions? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. How many field agents, KBI agents, investigative agents are you authorized to have?
I struggle a little bit with that because we have, sworn agents, we have just slightly over 100, but those include supervisory
Does that
personnel.
include your supervisors?
Working agents, we have about 88, I believe.
And how many of those are cross-trained in other, I mean, they're a KBI agent 1 or 2, and they get that training, but do you have some of the agents that specialize, like high-risk warrants or detection of drug, a higher level of that? Are there any of those agents cross-trained in those specialties?
We call them collateral duties. We have agents who do high-risk warrants, do tactical operations. We have agents that handle hazmat situations, drug laboratories that are cross-trained in those particular areas, that do undercover operations, that do child victim crime cases, that do intelligence work. There's just a number of those additional things that we call collateral duties that are not compensated, but they are done by those agents as a part of their routine or normal duties.
And how many supervisors are there?
We have 2 investigative divisions, and each of those divisions is overseen by an assistant director. So starting, each division has 1. We split the state up into 3 zones for better management of our resources, if you will. And so there's a special agent in charge of each one of those regional zones that handles programs and overall management. So there'd be 2 special agents in charge in each of those zones. And then there is also what we call assistant special agents in charge, which, for example, our tactical team has an assistant special agent in charge who supervises the operations of that team. We have an assistant special agent in charge who handles our hazmat duties, those kinds of things, that handles our child victim task forces. So there's probably 10 of those positions that are operational but have supervisory responsibilities in those collateral duties, like crime scene investigation, those kinds of things.
And one last question, and then how many support personnel, like your IT and whatever else are in there?
I generally, because it fluctuates a little bit, we have around 100 in each one of those buckets. So if you look, we have about 100 commissioned personnel, we have approximately 100 laboratory staff, and we have 100 support staff with and IT staff, legal, fiscal, add all of those responsibilities in together. And I can provide you a listing of where all those are if you would like.
Yeah, if you could, please. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Resman.
I don't really have a question. I have a request more than anything else. Yesterday, we were given a briefing from KDOT, and in that briefing, they had the number of employees that were eligible for retirement, and they went back probably a few years so they can kind of figure out their pipeline as far as the loss of employees in the near future. If we could get some type of statistics as far as how many agents or actually even scientists or your entire staff that are eligible for retirement right now, and how many are eligible in the next 5 years, so we have some type of idea of the possible loss rate that we may have to look at.
Okay, we can provide that for you.
Go ahead, Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed on the professional staff, it's $13 an hour.
Well, that's the lowest pay range.
And an increase would be 1430? 10%? Like I said, I shouldn't say that, but I pay my high school kids $15 an hour. Help me on the farm. So that'd be hard to hire people that way. You have a hard job.
I think you've made, I think that's an excellent point. Thank you for,
Yeah, he has no cattle, that's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's right. There's certain jobs you do on a cattle ranch that are particular to the profession, aren't there?
Same way in the House of Representatives.
Without a doubt. Other questions? So when we talk about the actual commission personnel, so, you know, it looks like there's a pretty clear progression for the forensic scientists if they pay attention to detail and are wanting to go through the steps to progress. Are there similar types of incentives for the KBI commission personnel so that if they get a certain certification or they achieve certain benchmarks that they can go to a higher pay grade?
the current compensation plan deals really just with progression based upon the amount of experience and time. There are no specific things that they could do that would increase their compensation rate at this point in time.
But that's something you could come up with as an alternative to reward the employees that are achieve certain certifications, or maybe they don't exist for KBI agents. I mean, I don't know. I know it's very easy, looks like in the forensic area.
There are some that would exist for sworn personnel. I won't go into all the difficulties there are in trying to apply those with transfers and, you know, the things that occur within an organization. But we have not attempted to apply those kinds of things at this point in time.
And then you said that there are some increases available with years of experience. And what triggers their ability to move up that scale as far as years of experience? Is that something that you do on an annual basis, or you need the legislature or the executive branch to allow? How's that triggered?
Our pay plan was approved back in 2016 that provided for that orderly progression. And the basis behind that really was to be able to tell people who were interested in coming to our organization what they could plan on making in 5 years or in 10 years. Because most local organizations will tell you you're going to progress each year to this particular level. And we could never say how we would be competitive 5 years out or 10 years out. So the progression allowed us to go on from a 3-year period and then an increase, then a 2-year period, then an increase, a 3-year period, then an increase. So we had some visibility out in the future as to what our employees could be making.
And that only applies to the commissioned agents and their supervisors?
That only applies to the commission personnel.
And their supervisors? Okay. Could we get kind of a summary of that sheet just so that we have an understanding? Because I'm sure whatever's passed will continue that same type of progression, or that's what you anticipate at least, right? Okay. Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, did that pay progression plan come from inside the agency, or did you go to the Department of Personnel for that? Was it developed by KBI?
Both.
Okay.
We worked with the Department of Personnel, and then legislatively it was funded.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony, and thanks for all of your hard work, and we'll look forward to seeing more as this progresses.
Thank you.
All right. On the agenda next, we have Colonel Jones with the Highway Patrol, but I thought, Colonel, let me ask if this is all right with you. We might have Steve Kearney go first in case that makes us think of any questions, or you would have an opportunity then to address any concerns that he might have. So, Steve, I hate to mess with you, but rather than us make the Colonel get back up when he can just hit it, when he's going through. I think it might be more productive for us, so. And you don't have to talk about planes. I saw your testimony.
Do it in there at the end because there's an expectation probably that,
Okay,
Just
all
wanna keep
right.
that-
And I just shed too much light on it already, didn't I?
but yeah, just keep it in
Yeah,
front of you.
okay.
Well,
All right.
not to that part yet, right?
Okay, let's go.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Kearney. I'm appearing here in my capacity as the Executive Vice President with the Kansas State Troopers Association. My firm represents them both before the legislature and administration and otherwise. Organization is made up of about 400 members. Those are sworn troopers, law enforcement officers, motor carrier inspectors, Capitol Police folks, as well as retirees. These folks, I'm sure the Colonel may get around to this as well, but our folks don't just serve in what you think of maybe as a traditional road role. They're out there on drug interdiction, aircraft, dog handling, nothing, right? Special response team, et cetera. And, one of the troops, one group of our members you all see multiple times every day, and that's the Capitol Police, Troop K. As you come in and out of here, they're the folks that protect the complex, protect you all, and everybody that comes in and out of here. So I looked over the Colonel's testimony, see, because I was going to back clean up, but okay. I looked it over, though, and there are several pieces that we're both covering the same part of, as you might imagine. One of them is competitive pay. You hear that cited a lot as a reason for recruitment and retention. And I'll just remind you, for those of you, and maybe tell you for the first time, for those of you that weren't here then, back in 2015, we worked very closely as an organization with the High Patrol Administration and with the legislature and with the rest of the executive branch to put together a pay progression plan, maybe similar to what Director Thompson was talking about for the KBI. I think they came along maybe the year after. We were near dead last in terms of salary, and salary does motivate people to a degree. Okay, so folks that want to be in law enforcement know they're not going into that to get rich, but they also want to be able to feed their families and hold their head up high about what they're getting compensated for in terms of what they're doing every day. So we put that into place. That was 2015, lots of moving parts. You've probably heard some about DROP. DROP was one of the pieces that we worked on and put into play at that time as well, trying to hold on to some of the more experienced folks on the back
Explain
end.
drop.
What's that?
Can you explain drop to me?
Sure, maybe. It's been a little while. So the DROP program basically is put together like this. When you are eligible to retire, and remembering that, KP&F folks can retire fairly young, at least from where I'm standing at this point, right? They can retire fairly young. So this is a program where they can basically re-up, continue doing the duties that they're doing, draw a salary, but those contributions are no longer going into KP&F, but their KP&F retirement contributions are accumulating. They're not receiving them, but they're accumulating during that period of time. And then when they fully retire, they have both a lump sum, their KPF benefits, and then they've maintained their salary and health insurance, et cetera, through that 3 to 5 year period of time. And I think, Harmer can correct me, but I think that's basically how it works. And we've been able to hang on to some folks with that. You want to keep experience out there as long and as much as you can. So over that period of time then, since this is 2022 already, so 2015, we had a 2.5% increase in 2020. Okay, and keeping in mind this is a whole progression plan, very carefully put together with distances between the classification steps or whatever you want to call them, so there's no compaction or compression in the pay plan, et cetera, where maybe your more senior folks kind of get penalized as they move forward. So since that time, we had, and really I think the point is and Chairman and I have had this discussion, so this month, maybe this last pay period, they're receiving another 2.5% increase. So as far as what brought us to today, that 2.5% has little, I mean, probably had little to no impact anyway, but it didn't have any impact on the fact that recruiting has gotten harder, fewer applicants, classes are getting smaller, et cetera. You're looking at 2.5% since 2015 up until the first pay period of this month. So pay progression plan is up where it needed to be, competitive with other agencies of similar size. Number of new recruits in 2016 and 2017, 43 and 49. And I'm talking about people, not people that applied, people that went to class, right? People that are at the academy. Look at it today, there's 11 in 2020, 12 in 2021. So as the whole plan has to move to keep salaries competitive with other agencies, because believe me, they're all moving. And when it doesn't, then this is the effect. Last graduating class in 2021, if my numbers are correct, saw 5 recruits, 5, complete their training. One of them's already resigned. Okay. So if you couple that with what appears to be kind of extraordinarily high or unusually high number of resignations plus retirements, it's really creating a public safety and officer safety problem for citizens of the state of Kansas and for our members. So this year, the governor in her State of the State and in her budget announcement, she announced $3.6 million recommended it for FY 2023. And the way it was phrased is $3.6 million from the KHP Operations Fund to, and this is a word that kind of jumped out at me, and I've been doing this a long time, so maybe I'm just getting, paranoid. But the word that jumped out to me was to alter the patrol's career progression plan to address recruitment and compensation issues for Kansas Highway Patrol troopers and law enforcement officers. So make no mistake, our membership is very grateful that the governor's recognized the need for more money into the Highway Patrol, into the law enforcement ranks, because we have a very, very real problem there. Because we don't have any details about how that fits together, and I sat in the other day when you had the briefing from Craig Knowlton from Human Resources Department Administration, where he talked about recruitment and retention, compression, maybe you raise the lower pay to attract people in or coax people in, but then the rest of the pay doesn't go up, and then you've spent your money training them, et cetera, and then they move on to some other gig somewhere else where the pay is better. And the state of Kansas has footed the bill for that. The problem here is that, we're not talking, and I'm not casting any dispersions, but we're not talking about operating a scraper or those kinds of things. I mean, you have to have training, you have to have a lot of things to qualify for those jobs. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to train up law enforcement officers. I mean, when you think of starting at the beginning of this process, from the application process all the way through the application process to even qualify to get a conditional offer or an offer of employment, physicals, et cetera, and then they go to the academy for, how many weeks is it, Colonel? 24 weeks of academy, and then field training, and then they're equipped with, automobiles, all their equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time you get somebody in the front end of that chute and out the other one in a perfect world, it's a stretch of time, and the investment it's enormous. So to have somebody like that, so if you coax them in, let's say we took that 3.6 and we said, hey, let's do 20% for the new guys. And then for the other guys, we'll just give them 2.5. So it creates all this, pretty soon you've got new guys making as much or more than, right? And these guys start falling out. I mean, it's a real conundrum. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, as the details become public or as they start getting worked out, that's something we really want to encourage you to look at closely, so that we don't have that. If, hey, we got some people in on the front and they're off to the FBI or wherever, and we spent a bajillion training them. And So I guess the other thing I'd say is, so retention, you hear folks talk about recruitment a lot because it's hard to get people in the door, and there are a lot of challenges perhaps to law enforcement today that we haven't had for the last few decades in terms of public opinion, et cetera. I'll tell you this, though, that data we've looked at, studies we've had, people that we do business with will tell you that Kansas is one of the strongest law enforcement states in the United States in terms of public opinion about cops and what they mean and et cetera. So, I mean, there's some good news in that, but make no mistake about the retention part. And because it's every bit as important. I mean, turnover and those kind of employees is very difficult to, it's difficult to replace them. Somebody leaves today, they're not going to fill them that job for 18 months or so. So one other thing that I really want to talk to you about is the pay disparity between the trooper classifications and the law enforcement officer classifications. And you heard a little bit of that discussion. I think you went into it when Knowlton was here, just a tiny bit. So we've long been, so what I'm talking about are Capitol Police officers, for example. They're in a classification of law enforcement officer in the state of Kansas versus troopers in a separate classification. The disparity between the two of those over the years as we began to close up differences, and by that I mean where they were trained, et cetera. As we closed up those differences, it was maybe 2.5%, I think, kind of historically, and this pay progression plan actually moved them a little further apart. Last year, you all, as a legislature, passed a proviso, I believe, but it was in the budget that and it was a piece the governor vetoed that would have leveled out the pay between entry-level trooper, entry-level Capitol Police officer, for example, okay? And listen, they're all cops. They're all trained. Now they're all trained at the same place. There's no less than, over the years there was kind of a feeling, because historically folks came into these roles from different places, and today that's not the case. They go and train right side by side at the Highway Patrol Academy, as they should. So at this point, from our perspective, on behalf of our members, I think really all the articulable differences between the trooper classifications and the law enforcement classifications really are gone. I mean, you can conjure up some things, but the truth is, those are the folks down there protecting you guys every day. They're certified law enforcement officers. They train in the same place, et cetera. To have that disparity really is difficult. It creates some difficulty for them, morale and otherwise, as you might imagine. And some confusion, I think some confusion from the citizens when they're part of the Highway Patrol, but yet their uniforms a little different, the hat's a little different, et cetera. We want, for our members, we want everybody to, walk and talk and quack like a duck because they all are ducks, right? Okay, so the last thing quickly, you can read this paragraph on aircraft because we've talked about it plenty. We've got an aging aircraft fleet, aging FLIR that fails more often than it works. And in fact, isn't even supported by the manufacturer anymore. It's sold, okay? So we've got pilots out there flying too low to try to aid and assist local law enforcement partners and our own folks. It's dangerous. So sum up right quick, because the rest of this wasn't terribly fast. Please be careful if you can, if you have input into this on how the pay progression plan gets adjusted, that you're looking at through a lens of both retention and recruitment or vice versa, and not just trying to fix one end of a problem. Let's fix this law enforcement officer versus trooper classification thing. So there are 20, and I'll just tell you, there are 24 Capitol Police officers, former Capitol Police officers right now, is my understanding, give or take. We're not talking about $1 bajillion here, right? We're not talking about very much money. In fact, governor could reclassify them through executive order if she so chose. So that's something to keep in mind. Keep in mind the aircraft piece. all these things, fewer troopers, less coverage, slower response time, officer safety, higher accident rates, fatalities, lower morale, the longer it goes, the worse it gets. So I did attach just something we had proposed a few years ago on the law enforcement officer kind of reclassification piece to satisfy some of the long-standing concerns, and you can, happy to answer questions about it at any other time or now for that matter, but when you have a chance to look at it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, anybody on the committee have any questions for Mr. Carney? You do, Bill? All right, go ahead, Representative Delperdane.
If I had to start it out here or not. Just a couple of things I've jotted down. I understand the money issues completely,
Right.
but I'm keep questioning, is there something running deeper than just the money within the ranks of the troopers? At the surface, are we backing the troopers as needed? We've got a current anti-police culture going on out there. How are we addressing this within the rank and files so they're not coming in each day with their heads hung low because of what they do?
Right.
And I don't know if you want to address that before I go on.
Yeah, I can. No, yeah, I can some, I think. So rest assured, in terms of the folks, our members, the folks that are serving every day, getting up, putting that uniform on, putting on a bulletproof vest, or hopefully, right? Those folks don't hang their heads about what they do, right? And they don't hang their heads about being members of the Kansas Highway Patrol. Most of them are, and there's, we have, generational, like a lot of law enforcement, right? Folks in the patrol, people that are very passionate about what they do. Pay can account some for morale, cultural stuff that's happening can account some. Differences in management style and the like between one administration or another can account for some of that. I can't put my finger on it, but the one most obvious right this minute is, I think, is pay. If that's helpful or not.
Okay, and then and I'll ask this with the next speaker here too, but what are the career opportunities from within? I mean, you hear other departments, police departments, you start out as a rookie, you become maybe a sergeant, detective, lieutenant, et cetera. What have we got in the ranks of the troopers?
Well, and Colonel's probably much better equipped to answer this than I am, but my kind of intro paragraph, it talks about all the various duties that are available, specialty assignments and the like. I mean, there are those types of trajectories within the Highway Patrol, other than just the standard, right? Just standard road trooper. They don't have, because in Kansas, our state police, if you will, are bifurcated with the investigative unit in the KBI over in the Attorney General's office, the Highway Patrol in the executive branch over here under the governor. So they don't have those. I mean, when I was assigned out in West Virginia, of all places, West by God, Virginia, one point with the feds, and those state police agencies out there have both in combination. So you have the opportunity as you work, much like a big police department. You can, I'm kind of tired of working the road or whatever. Then you can investigate homicides. You can go into drug investigations and the like. Like I said, I'm sure the Colonel can elaborate more, but it's a whole lot more linear with some branches off.
Which kind of leads me to my other question of I'm going to call it the black shirts versus the blue shirts, Capitol Police versus troopers. Do we have a plan where we can maybe rotate people in and out of here so that they have the road experience going on and they are equal and you don't have one saying thinking they're above the other type thing? Or?
Well, I can tell you that we've proposed one, and you have that with my testimony. I mean, if I can try to encapsulate this fairly succinctly, over the years, some of the motor carrier inspectors, law enforcement officer classifications, Capitol Police, they came from different agencies. One, I think, from the KCC, and one maybe from Revenue or D of A or someplace. But as it's grown up, as they've grown up, as that's matured inside, there really isn't much difference. But there's a lingering, I believe, because I've heard it a few times, sense that, hey, they didn't go to the same academy we went to. So therefore, they shouldn't wear the same uniform we do. Well, they do go to the same academy now. And, you know, it seems to me that especially those folks, and even the ones that apply as Capitol Police officers, train at the academy next to the troopers, and then come back here to be Capitol Police officers, there's a little window, I think, where they can apply to go out on the road. It's sort of a reapplication process because they're still not the same classification. So it's moved closer. I mean, I'd say to you that other states have already addressed this, that a Capitol Police officer, folks that work in the State House or in the Capitol complex, those folks are troopers, and it's a specialty assignment, much like, you know, I hate to keep saying aircraft, but, you know, dog handling, you know, special response team, whatever. Those are specialty assignments that troopers are filling, not, you know, they don't have this bifurcation. So to be able to do that, I think you need to reclassify them, call them troopers, put them in trooper uniforms. For those folks that haven't been through the academy, you know, that's kind of a call on the, you know, on the part of the Highway Patrol if they want to let them, say, a lieutenant and then lateral out and supervise a road troop. Maybe those folks don't, but anybody that's been through the academy have that going forward. To me, it's a matter of let's just solve this. If we did it today, 10 years from now, we wouldn't be talking about it at all. It'd be in the rearview mirror and it'd all be.
And if you don't mind, do we have a couple different classifications of the Capitol Police? Because you see some in here in the T-shirts, they're not wearing guns or
Okay,
anything.
so those folks are, yeah, so those are not law enforcement officers. They're not part of our membership. Those folks
Okay.
are, you know, security guards, basically. Yeah,
All right, thank you.
sure.
Any other questions for Mr. Carty? And we might want to kind of think about the questions and address them to the colonel if they would be more appropriate there. Ron, or Representative Ellis, excuse me. I got a little familiar with you there. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate your testimony.
Happy to answer any questions.
Uh-huh. Sure. Colonel Jones, welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you here, specifically when we're talking about the pay plan. Some of the things that I could probably talk about would probably just duplicate what has been said already by the two other speakers that have addressed what we feel is a need for a pay plan. I will say, more than anything, we're very appreciative that the governor has recognized that there is a need for a pay plan or an increase on salaries and to be more competitive with where we have been in the past. So we greatly appreciate that. So where we have come from to where we are today is some of the elements that we've talked about. When the pay plan was established, in a sense, what I say, it gave a sense of anyone that came into an organization knew where they would be 5, 10 years or so. What I saw that from coming from outside into the agency is that the pay plan was stagnant. The rest of the world, if you would, moved on, and the pay plan stayed. And it was pretty much addressed to, like I said, when it was started for the Highway Patrol in 2015 and 16 or so, that was the pay plan. So the increases came along according to the pay plan, whereas other increases that were occurring throughout the state did not affect that pay plan because it was set separately from the other employees. So of that then, what we have seen is other agencies, other states, has been addressed already, have made their adjustments or so. So of what we see of this, of today, of what the governor has presented is trying to address that. Various matters that come in when we're talking about the low attempts of individuals coming into the law enforcement community as well as the Highway Patrol. There's various elements that come into play. One, we have seen, obviously, the negative connotations towards law enforcement nationwide, not just here in Kansas. And then also, we are dealing with a different brand, if you will, of employees that come into law enforcement. We understand there are some individuals that are coming in to law enforcement that do not see 30, 25 years as a career. Now we're looking at 5, 10 years, and the individual moves on. We see that individuals now come in and they are looking at the bottom dollar. What is the cost? What will I get paid? I'm sure my counterparts here have seen individuals that come in law enforcement and will leave to go get paid $1 more or so, and then move to another agency to get paid another. So when we talk about those individuals loyal to an agency, it's different of today. It really is. And so when we talk about our challenges, there was a comment about morale in the agencies or so. I think morale is intrinsic. There are other elements, but yes, pay does make a difference of an individual's morale and what we have, those type of things. How we combat that, way I've said, is try to be as positive, at least from a management style throughout the agency. And it's not just the uniform, because we're talking about individuals such as the director talked about. It's not just the agents. We're talking about the forensic specialists and the clerical and administrative, and that's the same case of what we have with the Highway Patrol. So what we try to do is try to give some type of an uplift of individuals, recognize individuals. One of the things that I've seen for me, I hope that it's worked, is to recognize our individuals when there's been something that's good that comes along with the agency. I personally recognize those individuals, spot check or those type of things. I don't get everybody, but occasionally individuals will receive a note, a phone call, or whatever it is, to recognize them, let them know. I know you may not be the highest paid individual in the state, but the quality of the work is appreciated by myself, administration, and others, as well as the citizens. I share those. Individuals across the state will send in a note. I make sure that that individual is aware of that, as well as their supervisor, so that can go in their personnel file to let them know that everything that they do is not negative. There are positives in our state and for the constituents that we serve out there. So, again, I don't want to overstate some of the things that we've talked about or that has been brought up, but one that has obviously brought more awareness to us as far as bringing in employees that we've all seen is the COVID and pandemic. Individuals are not willing, that I've talked to, have not been willing to come and put themselves in peril, if you will, to make contact with individuals that are a pandemic or whatever it is at that particular time. We see a rise in mental health. Individuals are now put in a position now to deal with individuals that have mental health issues, whereas we know and understand that law enforcement is now taking on certain responsibilities with those type. So from all of that, what we try to do to combat and try to at least work with those that are within the agency, if anything, is we look at our policy changes of how we can do to be as fair as possible to individuals to make sure they're valued. When talk about policy changes, to understand as we evolve as a nation, as a state, and also as an agency, we'll look at what do we need to do to evolve with that. One is the Highway Patrol has always been at stream, clean cut type, and I think we will always maintain that. But when we talk about individuals that see the culture of tattoos, we've had a policy of years of standing that you do not have tattoos. We've modified that to the point where it cannot be visible to individuals. Obviously, you don't want anything that is offensive. The question that comes with that, where the agency stayed away from that, was what is offensive? What's offensive to you can be offensive to me. So there was a point where there was no tattoos. That way we wouldn't have to deal with it. Now we're looking at to a point where we understand that the individuals that are coming to the agency have tattoos. there are some people out there that are very valuable to an organization. And do we throw that away just because they have a tattoo? But at the same time, we have an appearance and we have standards for that. So the tattoo would be something that's not visible to the hand, neck, and those type of things right there. So we're trying to evolve and make some of those changes, but also we have a standard that we want to maintain for the citizens of Kansas with this uniform and how we conduct ourselves. So recruitment has changed, as we understand. With the recruitment, we know that we're challenged. The people that we, in years past, 200, 300, 400 people. I started in Highway Patrol in the year of '82. When I did it, there were hundreds of applicants that were applying for 20-something positions. That is not the case anymore. Recently, there were probably 100 and some individuals for a class that we're going to start later on in the year. Of that, you figure you're going to, for each process that you go through, you're going to lose individuals. Anywhere from 10 to 30% of those individuals are going to go to the wayside, either because something in their background or their standard, or some people don't show up for the test. They apply but don't show up. And this is not anything foreign to our state, to our agency. I'm sure you can talk to the director and many other agencies. Some individuals will apply but don't show up. And then some don't pass the test. And then some don't pass the background. And then some don't pass the polygraph. And then they have a hard time with interviews. So by the time we get to a class of 110, we're down to 20 that comes to the final interview. And maybe we'll get to 15 that will make it. And of that 15, 2 don't show up for the class when it starts. And then 3 will quit within the first week. And they will tell you they're not ready for law enforcement. Although they've been informed, they've been given video, they've been given phone calls, we've been given written correspondence, what to expect, who to talk to. And so these are challenges that we are experiencing in our agency as well. So by doing that, we're trying to work through a recruitment effort through diversity. We've gone over and beyond the places that we normally go. We're going to different places to individuals. We're going to historic black colleges. We're going to foreign community events to put ourselves into the community to let them know that who we are as Highway Patrol, not just someone in a car going up and down the highways, but also to understand that we are a service-oriented agency and we avail ourselves to the individuals or so. Our training, our recruitment process, there's a long process, as you can probably understand, to get individuals quality in there. We've streamlined our process so individuals are not waiting for a long time. There was a time and it would take maybe a year, year and a half before an individual would actually wear this uniform on their first day. We've streamlined that, brought that down, working with our HR. They're working hard, but we understand the purpose of what we need to do to accomplish that goal. Our recruitment, not only do we have one recruiter, we have adjunct recruiters across the state where they can spread themselves out to spread our message to individuals right there. Social media. I'm not on social media. I'm not on the but to understand that the individuals that we're trying to bring to our agency, that is their sense of communication. From Instagram and Facebook and so on and those type of things. So we have individuals dedicated with that. So we're trying, we really are. One of the challenges, again, is that when we avail ourselves, again, we're appreciative of what the governor has done to show some importance of where we are to bring individuals to our agency or so. So in short, I'll just read that. It's in here for the agency continues conversations with the governor's office to address challenges surrounding the pay of our uniformed officers there. And we understand that 3.6 that's where we are. We're still having conversations of how we go about that. But if implemented, the proposed plan will align the Kansas Highway Patrol trooper pay to be more competitive with local agencies and nearby state law enforcement agencies as well. This will be a more appropriately positioned for the patrol to be successful when we're recruiting new troopers, and will retain those troopers contemplating leaving the agency. In turn, the patrol expects the increase in both the number and quality of trooper recruits. These steps will allow the agency to provide improved levels of service to its public and safety partners and the citizens of the Kansas area. One that really strikes me is that over the last few years there, we've seen the death tolls go up on our state. And for that, then, I know, and I truly know and understand, without the visibility on the highways, people they're more errant in their driving. We've seen the speeds go up, not just in Kansas, but across the nation. And speed is reflective of that. So the more we can put out on our streets, the more we can assist and bring those down, I do believe. So in all of this right here, I really appreciate your consideration for the agency's request and the comments of those right there. And I'll open myself for any questions if you have.
Thank you, Colonel. Questions from anybody in the committee? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. First of all, well, two-part question. How many troopers is the KHP authorized right now?
Well, I'll say the total agency, we're probably about 880 is what we have. Authorized for a uniform would probably be about 520 or so. I don't think I've ever seen that in my time.
I
don't think I've ever seen that.
Does that include the Capitol Police?
Down troopers
just
for that
troopers?
right there. And then when you talk about the 880, that includes the motor carriers, that includes the Capitol Police, and includes the clerical as well.
That's 880?
880 would be the total of employment. Right now, we're probably about 470 for troopers, 471.
Do you know offhand how many of those are master troopers?
You know, I couldn't tell you right off my hand, but I could get that information for you as well.
And there's a difference in pay once they attain that master trooper status, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And according to the pay plan, as the director talks, it says, it alternates 2 and then 3 years or so, and it brings like that. Now, an individual upon coming to the academy would be given a pay. Upon graduation, they're given a bump in their pay. And at that point, then they would move into the pay plan that goes on right there. Once an individual has achieved certain training modules and years in service then they can become a master trooper and move on right there.
And just one other thing that was mentioned, I think in Mr. Kearney's little presentation, was the FLIR, forward-looking infrared system that's mounted on the KHP aircraft. Is that a problem? I mean, is that something that's...
I really hate to cut you off, but I hate to delve into the airplanes too much. I mean, go ahead and ask the question, but let's stay on salary as much as possible today.
Okay.
I mean,
All right,
get your, no, go ahead, Representative, and
I
ask
just
the
wanted
one.
to know if that was a safety concern, safety to the pilots and the observers, or is that just something that's outdated and just needs to be updated?
It's outdated, needs to be updated. And when you talk about safety items there's certain times when the aircraft, as Mr. Kearney said, sometimes if the FLIR is not working, they're only operated, which they could operate at nighttime, and if not having that, they would operate at daytime. That means they have to be lower, and they'd use their visuals right there. Now they're at, and there are some people, quite frankly, that will shoot at a plane. Now they're closer to the ground at those type of things, and they're in the air, they can be seen. So, yeah, they're outdated.
And some of the planes don't have flares, isn't that correct?
That's correct. Not all
Yeah.
of them do.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, we'll get plenty of fun time to do airplanes at some point. Let's stay on, okay, other questions? We'll switch parties. Wait, we'll switch parties and let Representative Delperdang go. Okay, Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Colonel, for your time this afternoon. You mentioned COVID-19 and its impact on your recruiting. The Officer Down Memorial page shows that COVID-19 deaths have been the #1 line of duty cause of death for 2020 and 2021. But it doesn't, I don't follow it enough to know how it impacts Kansas. Do we have additional vacancies that are just more than they would have been because of that in Kansas?
It so happens that Director Thompson here he's been in communication with our law enforcement agencies as well for those that have been affected and actually succumbed to that, to make sure they're recognized as well, line of duty type of death where we would see them out here. So yes, COVID has made an impact, if you will. Officer Down Memorial page last year, without giving those specifics quotes there, a typical year would be that a line of duty death by way of violence would probably be in the 60s, 70s or so across the nation or so. Automobile crashes, about 45 or so. COVID, over 300 last year.
That's what I'm aware of. So I wondered if, if that is impacting our vacancies as well, that would complicate our recruiting efforts or make them exponentially higher.
I'm sorry. I think that has made an impact for the fact that individuals will look at, these are the dangers, not only of a gunshot and other type of things, but now you're exposing yourself to individuals where you could actually succumb to that right there. And individuals will now say, why would I want to go into a field of danger for something like that?
Thank you so much.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Really appreciate you being here. I enjoy hearing you. The first big paragraph on page 2, I think you just said an absolute mouthful there as far as some of the recruiting issues. So I was happy to see that. On page 3, you got into the fiscal impact with the governor's expenditure increase of $3.5 million. What will be the average of pay effect on the trooper, whether it be a trooper or a master trooper, et cetera? I mean, is it a percentage or $1 an hour type thing? Or
that is yet to be working through that, working with the governor's office and those type of things, and budget and personnel. We're working through those.
And is that amount, will that be just for you, or is it spread across all law enforcement agencies? Or is it just for KHP?
Our plan for this 3.6, this is what we're working for, the Kansas Highway Patrol.
Okay, excellent. And then one more question, if I could, and I hope I'm not stepping out of bounds. Can I get you to answer a question for Mr. Thompson? I wrote this down when he was talking. He got into the starting salary for newly hired special agents, and he got into some of the criteria. And I'm thinking in my mind, that's probably similar to a master trooper. Been there 5-6 years. I know you're not investigators, but you do some stuff there. What's the average pay for a master trooper, where I could maybe look at, here's one state agency compared to another? And if you don't want to answer that, I respect it too. But
well, I think the director addressed that simply by, one is 2 different duties. And for that then, there's certain requirements for an investigator, whereas he would take in an individual to be an investigator that has experience. We don't necessarily have individuals come in that have to be experienced.
that's why I said master trooper. 'Cause
Right,
I'm
right.
assuming you've got
Yes.
some experience on there then.
Right, and I don't have that right there, but I can get that, and that way you can kind of compare the apples and oranges, and so.
I'd be curious, as long as it's not inappropriate, but I'm just trying to see how one agency compares to the other. And
Yeah, and I heard you earlier, you were talking about advancement in the patrol. And again, it goes right back to what Director Thompson had. It really is set. We don't have those types of advancements other than a promotion. Now, we have different positions within the patrol where various, similar to what Director Thompson talked about. So you can have an individual that works the road and has certain auxiliary duties that would come with working the road, such as our special response team. Those are not necessarily individuals that are always in a special response, but they do their normally duties, and then they get assigned and get called out or so. Now, we do have some that are assigned to that, but not a large number of that. So you have other duties the individuals can transfer to keep as diverse as possible. From K-9, aircraft, motor carrier enforcement, you have your auto theft. We have our bomb team, enforcement, and those type of things right there. So, and we have training. We have breath alcohol training, and those that go out and specialize in training of DRE and breath alcohol to others. That kind of falls into our training there. So there's a variety of things other than just working the road and what have you. And then generally, when it comes to making a difference in the pay, generally it's by promotion. Some years ago, we were put in a position where we had certain grades of supervisory where we had a sergeant's position, and along the way that has been removed, and now we have a lieutenant. So you have a trooper, trooper trainee, if you will, a trooper, a master trooper. Those are non-supervisory positions, and other than going into a specialty. And then you have a lieutenant, which is a first-line supervisor. And from that, you become a commander of a unit or a region or so. So you go from a first-line supervisor right to a commander. And then after that, it's a major, a light colonel, and then the colonel. So that kind of gives you a lay of where we are with our agency. So.
Okay, I appreciate you taking a stab at that, so thank you for being here.
Questions? So I have a few. So there is no way to increase your grade by becoming a K-9 specialist or a bomb person or signing up for the special response. He gets paid the same as the guy that does nothing extra.
Yes. Now, you would have maybe possibly for the aircraft because of their duties, those type of things right there. But beyond that, they're paid the same.
And what's the number of vacancies of troopers at the moment? You're authorized for around 520, you believe. Do you know how many filled positions you have?
We're right about 470.
About 470?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 470 filled.
Yeah. And our Capitol Police is, I believe we're full on the Capitol Police at the particular time.
You're full?
Yes.
So I was reading some of the, sometimes I get a little confused about the need for stuff, but there's this talk about moving the LEO to trooper classification. Is there a difference in pay between a trooper 1 and a LEO officer 1 and a trooper? Yes. Because I look and it says something about in 2016 in January, we eliminated the 2% wage differential for LEOs and troopers. So how did we eliminate the 2% differential and then it came back in? Or is that not accurate?
I don't have that history with me right now at that particular time. However, then when that was taken care of, the Capitol, the CPP was instituted there. There was a pay plan that came in. Now, what I will say is I don't have a problem with anyone making their money that they well deserve. What comes from that is, and I know Ms. Kearney would like that, what I say to that is a Capitol Police is a law enforcement officer, has been trained, but their duties are different than a trooper. And if we were to make that pay parity, then I foresee that you now have issues or the troopers that says, I'm doing the same thing and I'm doing something different, I get paid. I don't have a problem with law enforcement, our folks there. I'm just saying that the fact is that Capitol Police have a duty and I look at it as a municipal police department.
Do you know how many pay grade differences there are between comparable levels of, I guess, trooper and law enforcement officer 1? Do you know what the difference in pay is roughly?
I couldn't without having that
Okay.
in front of me there, but I can get that information for you.
So one of the things that, we've had a lot of extensive hearings regarding pay in the state. And I've had, recently I had a member of your agency say they hadn't had a raise since 2017. And I'm, again, going back to some of the documentation we've got. We gave them raises, I guess, of 2.5% in 2020 and 2.5% in 2022. Did those go on as then pay grade increases or step increases for those individuals? Do you know?
I believe it's a step as it goes along, because what you're trying to do is keep the pay plan in check. So as you have the pay plan, everything moves such as that, and that's all it'll be.
And so in addition to those 2.5%, my understanding is Director Thompson's pay plan has some similarity to your pay plan, excuse me. So a new trooper starts, and he gets his raise when he gets through the academy, and then he gets a raise a year later. And then in addition to these 2.5% that we did statewide, or we gave to your group, they also got their normal increases in the pay progression plan, correct?
My understanding is the pay progression plan had a 2.5 increase, which is by contract with the Kansas Troopers Association, Kansas State
Right.
Troopers Association from that.
And then when we did the 2.5%, was that part of the progression plan, or was that in addition to the progression plan? The 2.5% in 20 and 22?
My understanding is the 2.5 stood alone from the pay plan itself.
It was in addition to?
I would have to check on that, unless.
Can we
they
get a
come-
copy of,
Sure.
or a summary of
Yeah.
what the pay plan is?
Right. Yeah.
And then maybe we can dial down on those a little bit. One of the things I would like to see before we approve this 3.5 million, we would like to, I think, see where the 3.6 million is going, whether it's to move this person from this pay grade to that, what pay grade, or whether it's to increase 2 steps, just so that we have real understanding about which positions are getting what. If you don't have it ready by the time of your budget area, I'll probably put it as something that we can consider an omnibus. Hopefully you'll have it worked out by then.
If I can say, I know that we have been working with, excuse me, DPS, Governor's Office, and others like that.
Budget Office, I was impressed with their testimony and how they try to go about stuff. And in conjunction with that also, I'd like to see what the market analysis is done. I know they're doing market analysis. We'll want to at least have an understanding of why we're doing all of that. Any other questions by anybody on the committee? I assume the bump at graduation is a pay grade rather than a step, I'm guessing.
It's a step over.
And I might tell you also, Representative Delberding, that memo that I handed out yesterday, it's got a link on to that administration thing. So maybe we can get Susan or myself to go through and find those different classifications like that thing I handed out, and then we can see what pay grade the existing personnel are at. And when in our spare time, Susan, Thursday or something like that. Okay. Any other questions for the superintendent? Okay, all right. Hey, thank you very much for taking time. I know this was kind of just put together at the last minute, and we do appreciate it. You know how busy that budget hearing gets. I wanted to understand this separately. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right, committee, we have nothing on the agenda. Hopefully, Myrtle, do you think, are you guys planning on emailing us the draft documents for those budgets we got to review on Monday, or are we going to have to hit them cold at 3:30?
We can email those.
Maybe this weekend?
Yeah,
To-
we'll provide them to Susan, and she can distribute those out via email probably Friday.
Well, or I guess the real question, Representative, was drive all the way back to the Capitol on a Friday evening to get your budget summary or get it emailed. Anyway, Chiefs all the way, baby. Any other comments for the good of the committee? Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. I know it's been a long week. Thanks for your work. We're adjourned.